Us for more is Lara Brown, political scientist and director of the graduate programs in political management at George Washington University. Simon Marks is the president and chief correspondent for Feature Story News. And Jane Hall is a veteran journalist who now teaches journalism at American University. Thanks to all of you for joining us. Lara, let me start with you at the end of the desk there. I know we're jumping the gun, but as you just heard Jim say, this is looking like a Bush-Clinton matchup. It's looking very plausible, and if you look at some of the media, it looks like a sure thing. Here we have a country of 300 million people. We've got these two families, again, dominating politics. What is this, a sense of entitlement? How did this happen?
Well, I think you're right that it does look as though that could be the matchup, but I think looks are deceiving. One of the things that's really important to understand is that Republican field is really bunched up. So when you look at the polls, I mean, most of them are 1 to 2% away from each other, and as a result, they're really within the margins of error. So Jeb Bush has a much more difficult race. Hillary Clinton, no doubt, she is tracking toward a nomination, but I imagine the Republicans are going to end up with some other choice.
Simon, it's very early days as far as the international media is concerned, but how does it look from out there? Does it look like two royal families fighting for the crown?
Well, I think there's no question that on the international stage, there are quizzical questions being asked, as you put it earlier, of how a country of this size can once again generate a Clinton-Bush presidential race. But I agree with Lara. I think it is way too early to conclude that we are inexorably heading to a Clinton-Bush race. We're so far away. I was a former British Prime Minister, Harold Wilson, once said a week is a long time in politics. We're months away from the first vote in this election being cast, and there are so many issues that can trip Hillary Clinton, Jeb Bush, and all the others up on the campaign trail over the next several months, especially in an election that's going to have a new dynamic to it because of the huge growth of social media in the United States since the last election. That to conclude that we are definitely heading to that titanic battle between those two great families, I think is very premature.
Yeah, well, it's very much a guessing game right now. Simon, Jane, you've been covering politics for a long time. Has it always been about money, name, political connections, or is this a relatively new thing?
Well, I think the name has always been important. We had the Addams family a long time ago. And I think that, unfortunately, since the Citizens United decision that declared, that we have a free-for-all, the cost of running for office, the dark money, the people have even talked about the billionaire primary that people have to get. Marco Rubio is now talking to the man who, Sheldon Adelson. I mean, who was a financier of previous campaigns, and that didn't work out well in terms of the voters. But it throws a whole new element in terms of how much money you have to raise. Obviously, celebrity narrative is in favor of the candidates, but as your correspondent said, it cuts both ways. I interviewed Bernie Sanders recently on campus at American University in front of 200 very positive young people, and I kept telling my journalist friends, this guy has something. He's talking about income inequality, student debt. He may be the in essence, third-party candidate running against Hillary Clinton, or he may push her to the left. So I agree. I don't think it's written in stone that certainly that Bush is going to get the nomination.
All right, Laura, there was an interesting piece in the Washington Post, and this paragraph was in there. It said, so entrenched are these two families in presidential politics, that's the Bushes and the Clintons, that Americans under the age of 38 have experienced only one national election, 2012, in which there has been no Bush or Clinton running for president or vice president. Should America be worried about that?
Well, I don't really think so. I mean, first, we have to kind of get rid of this idea that the Clintons are a dynasty. Right. I mean, really, it started with Bill Clinton. He didn't come from the Kennedys or the Bushes, for that matter. He didn't have, family or relatives who had held positions in the Senate or past presidents. So the Clintons really are a dynasty of their own making. They're a first-generation dynasty, if you will. Right. And then I think it's important to realize that even though our system is open, by its very nature, it actually does exclude people. And what I mean by that is that there's a professor by the name of John Aldrich who's at Duke University. He was a mentor of mine, and he says in a book, and I think this is right, sure, it's true that anybody can grow up to be president of the United States, but only if they grow up to be one of the major party nominees. And that is a tough task. So our system is much more selective and exclusive than it's kind of perceived to be.
But there is also, isn't there, a real danger of Bush and Clinton fatigue in a couple of different ways. I mean, Jeb Bush, as we saw in that clip at the start of the program, is desperately trying to escape the name, in a way. I mean, and even the logo, right? The logo that simply says Jeb, exclamation mark.
Yeah, so
you wouldn't know he was Bush, right? He's desperately trying to get away from it.
You have brand recognition, but it works the other way too.
And then with Hillary Clinton, I mean, first of all, there's the fatigue in the minds of many voters of having been associated with the Bill Clinton presidency, but also fatigue in a slightly different way. Absent meaningful competition, I actually agree with Jane that Bernie Sanders has got, you know, a lot of interesting things going on, but absent a real race for the nomination, she's got to spend months out there on her own making essentially the same speech again and again and again. And the possibility of voters simply getting tired of all that and switching it off, I think, is enormous.
Well, that was certainly, you know, people spoke cynically in the media about the relaunch of Hillary Clinton. And it was so controlled, you know, her associated with the dreams and aspirations of ordinary Americans, and then not really taking any questions from the media. I think you're right. They don't want her out there too much. You know, the one thing we haven't talked about, though, is there is going to be an appetite for electing the first woman president that I think we shouldn't discount. I don't think she's a slam dunk with young voters, which is very interesting to me. I don't hear the excitement that they had for Barack Obama. But for a lot of women, that's going to be a big factor. And, you know, the fact that Bill Clinton was president before her and that Barack Obama got to be president before many people thought it was her turn, that's also a very interesting dynamic.
Barack Obama said a few months ago that he believed that when voters went into the polling booths, they were going to be looking for what he referred to as that new car smell. It is not clear that either Hillary Clinton or Jeb Bush have it.
Yeah, they're known quantities, Lara, aren't they? So are we just going to see more of the same business as usual, the same lobbyists, the same hangers-on, the same people in the White House or wherever?
Well, this is why I would argue that I think the Republicans are going to pick one of their fresher faces. When you actually look at their list of candidates and you look at some of the straw polls that are happening already in the early states, what you're seeing is that those people who haven't run before are doing better than those who have. And what I mean by that is people like Rand Paul, Marco Rubio, Ted Cruz, Ben Carson, Carly Fiorina, they're actually all gaining some traction, whereas Rick Santorum and Mike Huckabee and Rick Perry are not. So I think you will see the Republicans very much wanting to say, leave the past behind, let's move forward, don't vote Democratic, don't vote for another Clinton.
Jane, there was a Huffington Post YouGov poll which shows that Americans are largely happy with the current crop of candidates. Does that indicate that there's no appetite for other third-party candidates, fringe parties perhaps?
Well, I don't think they're going to, third-party candidates, you know, Ross Perot tried it, Ralph Nader tried it. The system is rigged against them. Exactly. I mean, it just is. So I think there's so many interesting things, and it's early. You know, I've seen polling that shows that Republicans think national security is our most important issue. Democrats think job opportunity is our most important issue. I mean, I think it's still fluid. And I think that there is an interesting opportunity for a fresh face. I mean, the other thing we haven't talked about is the Latino vote, which is nearly 17% in this country. Marco Rubio can tell his story about being from you know, a story from Cuba and an immigrant experience. Ted Cruz can also talk about his background. I feel a little sorry for Bush because Bush has great credentials on that, but I don't think people know that or see that about him.
Simon, Gary Hart, former Democrat candidate, was quoted in The Guardian as saying that if this was Latin America and we saw, you know, presidential office being passed from one family to the other, it would be an oligarchy.
Look, I think it's optically difficult for the United States, all of this. When you say, and I think you're absolutely right to say it, the system is rigged and it's impossible for a third-party candidate to break through. That's absolutely true. I mean, this is an electoral carve-up between the two great old parties here, Democrats and Republicans. The money is carved up between them in from what an international perspective is an utterly perverse way. And the fact that it becomes so difficult for a country that wants to tell other countries how to act democratically, that it can't get a viable third alternative to those two great parties is at least optically troubling.
But let me just say that that is actually a political science, one of the one and only laws that we have in political science that essentially says that when you have first winner past the post system and you have single member districts, you're always going to end up with two parties. So some of it is about the structure of how our elections are set up that actually lead to the outcome of two parties, and two parties always and only.
Yes, but Lara, of course, in the mother of democracies on the other side of the Atlantic, you have a first-past-the-post system, and now, as we discussed around this table some weeks ago, more choices than the British electorate can stomach, you know.
One other thing is the money in politics, and most Americans of both parties want less money out.
Yeah, we are going to talk about that, but first we're going to have to take a break. Coming up, some observers predict this will be the $5 billion presidential election, the most expensive in history. We'll